The winter wind howled through the capital's stone streets as Princess Helena stood before the towering palace gates, iron shackles biting into her wrists. Her father, Duke Roderick, held the chain that bound her like a common criminal, his face carved from ice and disgust. "Behold the shame of House Valdres," his voice boomed across the gathered crowd. "My own daughter, too fat for marriage, too worthless for any noble house. Today I make amends for her disgrace." Helena kept her chin raised despite the jeers that erupted from the courtiers and merchants pressed against the palace walls. "Fat princess," they shouted. "Look how she waddles." Their laughter cut through the bitter air like shards of glass. At 16, Helena had endured years of their cruelty, but today felt different. Today felt final. Her father had summoned half the court to witness what he called her final disposition, a spectacle designed to erase the embarrassment she had allegedly brought to his name. "The Alpha King has agreed to take her as payment for our family's debts," Duke Roderick announced, yanking the chain. "Perhaps in his service, she will finally learn discipline." The massive palace gates groaned open with a sound like breaking bones. From the shadows stepped a figure that made the crowd fall silent. Alpha King Aaron himself, not some lowly steward. His presence commanded the courtyard like a force of nature, tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of storm clouds. Ravens perched on the gate towers above seemed to bow their heads in acknowledgement. "Your Majesty," Duke Roderick said, attempting a bow while still gripping Helena's chain. "As promised, I deliver my daughter to settle." "Stop!" The Alpha King's voice was quiet, yet it carried absolute authority. He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the frost-covered stones. "I see no debt requiring payment. I see no transaction requiring completion." Confusion rippled through the crowd. Helena felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Duke Roderick's face reddened. "Your Majesty, we had an arrangement." "Show me this arrangement." Aaron extended his hand. "Present the writ that grants you authority to treat a royal daughter as chattel." With trembling fingers, Duke Roderick withdrew a scroll from his robes. The Alpha King examined it carefully, his expression growing darker with each line he read. When he looked up, his eyes held the promise of winter storms. "This document," he said slowly, "bears curious markings." He turned the parchment toward the light streaming through the gates. "Lord Elcar, attend me." A scholarly man emerged from the king's retinue, his robes marked with the seal of the royal archives. He studied the writ, then whispered urgently in the king's ear. The Alpha King nodded grimly. In one swift motion, he drew a small blade and cut Helena's shackles. The iron fell away like discarded snakeskins. "Princess Helena of House Valdres," he said formally, "I declare you a royal ward under my direct protection. You will reside within these walls, receive education befitting your station, and answer to no authority but mine." The crowd gasped. Duke Roderick sputtered protests, but the king's next words silenced him utterly. "As for this writ," Aaron held the document high, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtyard. "Lord Elcar has made a most interesting discovery about its origins." Helena watched her father's face drain of color as the king's fingers traced something on the parchment, something that shouldn't have been there. Lord Elcar stepped forward, his scholar's eyes bright with discovery. "Your Majesty, this seal bears the royal griffin, but observe," he pointed to a small detail on the wax impression. "The griffin's left talon holds a scroll, as decreed in the new charter of last spring. Yet this document is dated 3 months prior to that change." A collective intake of breath swept through the crowd. Helena felt the world tilting beneath her feet. Her father had forged royal documents? "Furthermore," Lord Elcar continued, his voice carrying the weight of legal precision, "no legitimate writ of debt payment would use the phrase disposal of royal blood. Such language has been forbidden since the Treaty of Valdres, ironically negotiated by your own ancestor, Duke Roderick." The Duke's face had turned ashen. There must be some mistake." "The only mistake," Alpha King Aaron said, his voice cutting through the winter air like a blade, "was believing you could deceive the crown with amateur forgery." He turned to Helena, and for the first time his expression softened. "Princess, you have been gravely wronged, not just today, but for months, perhaps years." Helena found her voice at last, though it trembled. I, I don't understand, Your Majesty. Someone has been planning this humiliation carefully, the king replied. This forged document suggests a conspiracy to strip you of your royal protections and place you beyond the law's reach. His storm-gray eyes swept over the crowd, many of whom now shifted uncomfortably. The question is, who benefits from your disgrace? Duke Roderick stepped backward, but palace guards had already moved to flank him. Your Majesty, surely we can discuss this privately. Privacy? The king's laugh held no warmth. You chose to make this a public spectacle, Duke. You summoned witnesses to watch your daughter's supposed shame. They will now witness something far different. He gestured, and Lady Josiane emerged from the shadows of the gate, a woman of middle years with keen eyes and the distinctive blue robes of the Royal Healing Order. She approached Helena with careful steps. Princess, she said gently, I am Lady Josiane, Royal Healer and Keeper of the Women's Quarters. If you consent, I will escort you inside, where we can tend to your wrists and find you proper accommodations. Helena looked at the welts where the shackles had bitten her skin, then at the crowd still pressed against the palace walls. Some faces showed curiosity, others shame, but no longer mockery. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. What will happen to my father? She asked. King Aaron's expression grew granite hard. Justice will happen to your father. But first we must discover who else was involved in this scheme. He held up the forged writ. Someone taught him how to counterfeit royal seals. Someone provided him with restricted legal language. Someone wanted you vulnerable, Princess, and I intend to learn why. As Lady Josiane gently took Helena's arm, the king called out one final command that echoed off the palace stones. Let it be known throughout the realm, Princess Helena is under the crown's direct protection. Any who have wronged her will answer for it. Helena glanced back as they passed through the gates. Her father stood surrounded by guards, his face a mask of growing terror. But something else caught her attention. A figure in the crowd, a nobleman in rich burgundy robes, slipping away through the press of people. She had seen that man before, whispering with her father in shadowed corners of their manor. The palace's interior warmth enveloped Helena like an embrace after years of cold. Lady Josiane led her through corridors lined with tapestries depicting the realm's history, scenes of justice, wisdom, and protection that felt like promises made in silk and gold thread. Here, Lady Josiane said, guiding Helena into a circular chamber with tall windows facing the sunrise. The Healer's Hall has served as sanctuary for centuries. No one may enter without permission, and no harm may come to those within its walls. Helena marveled at the space, shelves of medical texts, dried herbs hanging in neat bundles, and a fire crackling in a hearth carved with protective runes. It felt more like home than anywhere she'd lived in years. Your wrists first, Lady Josiane said, gently examining the raw marks left by the shackles. As she applied a soothing salve, she spoke quietly. Princess, may I ask, how long has your father treated you thus? Helena hesitated. Speaking the truth felt like crossing a threshold she could never return from. Since my mother died 3 years ago, he said that I brought shame to our house, that no man would want a fat princess, so I had no value. Lady Josiane's hand stilled. Your mother was Princess Alara of House Brightwater, was she not? The treaty maker? Yes, but Princess Alara negotiated the grain accords that ended the famine of 7 years past. She saved thousands of lives. Lady Josiane's voice held quiet fury. Your father would have you believe you inherited nothing of value from such a woman? Before Helena could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor. King Aaron appeared in the doorway, but respectfully remained on the threshold. Lady Josiane, Princess Helena, forgive the interruption. I bring news that cannot wait. Of course, Your Majesty, Lady Josiane said, not pausing in her ministrations. We have begun questioning Duke Roderick. He claims he acted alone, but his story contains inconsistencies. The king's expression was grim. He insists the idea to forge the writ was his own, yet he cannot explain how he obtained royal parchment or where he learned the proper legal phrases. Helena remembered the man in burgundy robes. Your Majesty, I saw someone leaving the crowd, a nobleman I've seen at our manor before. He wore burgundy with gold trim. The king's eyes sharpened. Can you describe him further? Tall, with silver at his temples. He has a ring with a large red stone that he turns when he's nervous. And Helena paused, remembering. He always arrives at our manor just after sunset and leaves before dawn. Lord Varen, Lady Joseon whispered, and the king nodded grimly. Master of the Eastern Territories and keeper of the Royal Seal Archives, King Aeron confirmed. He would have access to proper parchment in legal language. More troubling, he has access to the sealed records of royal bloodlines. A chill ran down Helena's spine. Why would that matter? The king exchanged a meaningful look with Lady Joseon before answering. Princess, your mother's line carries certain protections under ancient law, rights that some might find inconvenient. If someone wanted those rights nullified, discrediting you publicly would be the first step. Lady Joseon finished bandaging Helena's wrists with gentle efficiency. There's something else, Your Majesty. The princess mentioned her father's treatment began after her mother's death. That timing troubles me. As it should. The king stepped fully into the room, his presence somehow making the sanctuary feel even safer. Princess Helena, I need you to think carefully. In the months before your mother's death, did she mention any concerns about court politics? Any worries about your future? Helena closed her eyes, trying to remember through the haze of grief. Then something surfaced, a fragment of an overheard conversation. She was writing letters, secret ones, and she told someone, I think it was you, Your Majesty, that if anything happened to her, I must be protected at all costs. The silence that followed felt heavy with revelation. King Aeron's expression grew grave. Those letters exist, Princess. Your mother entrusted them to my personal archives with strict instructions. They were to be opened only if you were ever placed in mortal danger. He gestured toward the door. With your permission, I believe that time has come. Minutes later, they stood in the king's private study, a chamber lined with ancient texts and dominated by a massive oak desk carved with protective sigils. From a locked drawer, King Aeron withdrew a leather portfolio bound with ribbons that bore Princess Alara's personal seal. Your mother was far more than a treaty maker, he said solemnly, breaking the seal. She was a scholar of bloodline law, one of the few who understood the old protections written into our realm's founding documents. Lady Joseon moved closer as the king spread several parchments across the desk. Helena's breath caught as she recognized her mother's elegant handwriting. My dearest Aeron, the king read aloud, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have proven true. Helena is in danger not for what she has done, but for who she is. Helena's hands trembled. I don't understand. The king continued reading. The Brightwater line carries more than noble blood. We are the last direct descendants of Queen Lyanna the Lawgiver, whose charter established the People's Court, the right of common folk to seek justice directly from the crown. This right has been inconvenient for certain nobles who profit from legal manipulation. Lord Varen, Lady Joseon whispered, among others. King Aeron's voice held barely contained anger. Your mother discovered that a group of court nobles had been systematically weakening the People's Court by ensuring no Brightwater heir could claim their ancestral right to champion it. Helena felt the room spinning. My mother died of fever. Your mother died after attending a feast hosted by Lord Varen. The king's words fell like stones. The same Lord Varen who had access to the poison registry as keeper of archives. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Helena stared at the letter, her mother's words swimming before her eyes through unshed tears. King Aeron continued reading. If Helena reaches her 17th birthday, she can formally claim her heritage and restore full power to the People's Court. They will not allow this. They will try to strip her of legal standing through arranged marriage to a cruel lord, through false charges, or through public disgrace that forces her to renounce her titles. The forged writ, Helena breathed. It wasn't just cruelty, it was legal warfare. Precisely. The king folded the letter carefully. By attempting to sell you as payment for debt. Your father, willingly or unwillingly, was helping them strip you of royal protection. Once you were legally classified as property rather than princess, your bloodline claims would become void. Lady Joseon placed a comforting hand on Helena's shoulder. But they failed. You are safe here, and your rights remain intact. King Aaron moved to the window, gazing out at the courtyard where Helena's ordeal had begun. More than safe. Your 17th birthday approaches in 6 months. We have that long to expose this conspiracy and ensure you can claim your full heritage. Helena found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. What does that mean? Claiming my heritage? The king turned back to her, and for the first time since they'd met, he smiled, an expression that transformed his stern features completely. It means, Princess Helena, that you have the power to restore justice to thousands of common folk who have been denied their rights. It means you can become the champion your mother trained you to be, even if neither of you realize it at the time. Helena straightened, feeling something awakening within her. Not just hope, but purpose. But first, the king's expression grew serious again. We must keep you alive long enough to reach that birthday. Because Lord Varen and his conspirators have 6 months to stop you, and they have already proven they will kill to protect their secrets. 3 days later, Helena stood in the palace scriptoria surrounded by more books than she had ever imagined existed. Tall windows cast golden light across hundreds of volumes, scrolls, and manuscripts that chronicled the realm's legal history. Your education begins now, Lady Joseon announced, setting down a stack of texts. If you are to champion the people's court, you must understand every law, every precedent, every loophole that has been exploited against the common folk. Helena ran her fingers along the leather spine of the nearest book. I can barely read properly. My father said learning was wasted on a fat princess who would never marry well. Your father, came King Aaron's voice from the doorway, was ensuring you remained ignorant of your own power. He entered carrying a wooden box carved with ravens. These are your mother's personal law books. She wanted you to have them when you came of age. Inside the box, Helena found volumes annotated in her mother's handwriting, notes explaining complex legal concepts in simple terms, questions written in the margins, connections drawn between seemingly unrelated laws. She was teaching herself to teach you, Lady Joseon observed softly. Even then, she knew what lay ahead. Helena opened a book titled The Foundation of Justice and found an inscription on the first page. For my dearest Helena, may you always remember that the law belongs to all people, not just the powerful. With all my love, Mother. Tears blurred her vision, but she wiped them away determinedly. Where do I start? Here. King Aaron placed another book before her, the original charter of Queen Liana. Read the section about the people's court and tell me what you notice. Helena read slowly, mouthing the words. The language was archaic, but her mother's annotations made it clearer. When any subject of common birth suffers injustice at the hands of noble or merchant, they may petition the crown directly through the champion of Brightwater blood, who shall hear their case with full royal authority. She looked up, understanding dawning. I wouldn't just hear cases, I would have royal authority to judge them? More than that, the king replied. You could overturn corrupt local judgments, order restitution, even strip titles from nobles who abuse their power. The People's Court was designed to be the ultimate check on aristocratic cruelty. Helena felt something fierce and warm growing in her chest. How many people had suffered while she remained ignorant of this power? How many had been denied justice because she was locked away, being told she was worthless? Your Majesty, came a voice from the doorway. Lord Elcar appeared, his face grave. I bring urgent news from the dungeons. King Aaron gestured him forward. Duke Roderick has confessed? Not confessed, died. Lord Elcar's words hit like physical blows. The guards found him this morning. Appears to be poison, though he was kept under careful watch. Helena gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Despite everything, he was still her father. I'm sorry, Princess, the king said gently, but this confirms our worst fears. Someone has decided that dead conspirators cannot reveal secrets. Lady Joseon moved protectively closer to Helena. How did poison reach him in the secured cells? That, Lord Elcar said grimly, is what we must discover. But there's more troubling news. 3 of the guards who were on duty last night have requested immediate transfers to distant provinces. All 3 were recommended for their positions by Lord Varen. King Aaron's expression turned thunderous. Varin moves quickly. He's eliminating evidence and positioning loyal agents beyond our reach. Helena closed her mother's book, her hands steady despite her grief. He killed my father to keep him quiet, just like he killed my mother. Yes, the king confirmed, which means he will not hesitate to try again. We must accelerate your training, princess. Lord Varin clearly believes that with 6 months remaining, he has time to plan the perfect assassination. We must prove him wrong. Helena stood straighter, feeling her mother's words echo in her mind. Then let's begin. I want to read every case, learn every law. When my birthday comes, I want to be ready to give justice to everyone who has been denied it. As she spoke, neither she nor the king noticed the small figure pressed against the scriptoria's back window, a young page in Lord Varin's colors, carefully noting every word spoken within. That same evening, in a chamber hidden beneath the palace wine cellars, 5 figures gathered around a table lit by a single candle. Lord Varin sat at the head, his red ring catching the flickering light as he turned it nervously. The girl learns too quickly, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. My page reports she has already begun studying the Foundation Charter. At this rate, she will understand her full rights within a month. Lord Brennan, Master of Coins, shifted uneasily. Perhaps we acted too hastily with Duke Roderick. His death has made the king more suspicious, not less. Roderick was a liability, Varin snapped. The fool kept detailed records of our meetings. His study contained enough evidence to hang us all. He leaned forward, shadows dancing across his angular face. The king believes he has time to prepare the girl. We must disabuse him of this notion. Lady Morwen, the only woman present, spoke from the darkness beyond the candle's reach. Poison failed with the mother, too obvious, too traceable, and now they guard the daughter too closely for such methods. Then we do not target the daughter directly, said Lord Garrett, whose mercenary companies controlled trade routes throughout the eastern provinces. We target what she loves. Varin's eyes glittered with cruel interest. Explain. The healing woman, Lady Josiane, the girl has grown attached to her already, sees her as a mother figure. If something were to happen to her protector, the girl would be devastated, vulnerable, Lady Morwen continued, understanding immediately. Grief makes people careless. Desperate people make mistakes. Lord Brennan frowned. Lady Josiane is well regarded. Her death would cause questions. Not death, Varin interrupted, his mind working rapidly. Disgrace. Lady Josiane has access to restricted medical texts, including treatises on toxicology. If evidence were found that she had been researching poisons, particularly the rare Eastern nightshade that killed Princess Alara, the implications hung heavy in the air. Lord Garrett nodded slowly. The king would have no choice but to arrest her for treason. The girl would lose her primary teacher and protector. More than that, Lady Morwen added with vicious satisfaction, she would question everyone around her. Paranoia would isolate her, make her easier to manipulate. Varin reached into his robes and withdrew a small vial filled with violet powder. Eastern nightshade is distinctive, rare enough that possession alone suggests guilt. My agents can plant this in Lady Josiane's private chambers tonight. And if the king still refuses to believe it, Lord Brennan asked, then we plant evidence that Lady Josiane has been secretly corresponding with Duke Roderick. Love letters, perhaps, suggesting she helped him poison his own wife out of jealousy. Varin's smile was cold as winter stone. A woman scorned, seeking revenge on her rival's daughter. The story writes itself. The candle guttered, sending wild shadows across the stone walls. In the dancing darkness, the 5 conspirators looked less like nobles and more like the demons they had become. It is decided then, Varin declared. By tomorrow's sunset, Lady Josiane will be arrested for high treason. Princess Helena will be alone, friendless, and too broken to fight us. As the meeting dispersed, none of them noticed the small grate high in the wall, or the young kitchen servant who had been cleaning the wine stores and overheard every word. The girl slipped away through the servant passages, her heart pounding with the weight of terrible knowledge. She had to warn someone. But who could she trust with news of such a conspiracy? As she climbed toward the upper levels, one name came to mind. the stern but just king who had shown mercy to the fat princess at the gates. She only hoped she could reach him before dawn brought disaster to the one person brave enough to teach Helena about her destiny. The kitchen servant, a girl of perhaps 14 named Mira, had never approached the royal quarters in her life. Her hands shook as she clutched the small brass token that would identify her to the guards, a cleaning pass that technically gave her access to any part of the palace before dawn. The corridor seemed endless in the pre-dawn darkness, lit only by scattered torches that cast writhing shadows on the walls. Twice she had to duck into alcoves as night guards passed, their boots echoing like thunder in her ears. Finally, she reached the king's private chambers. The two guards flanking the door looked down at her with suspicion until she showed her token and whispered urgently, "I have information about a plot against Princess Helena. Lives are at stake." One guard disappeared inside. Moments later, King Aaron emerged, still wearing his night robes but fully alert. His storm gray eyes assessed the trembling servant girl with sharp intelligence. "Speak quickly," he commanded, leading her into his private study and closing the door firmly behind them. Mira's words tumbled out in a rush. The midnight meeting, the 5 conspirators, the plan to frame Lady Josiane with planted evidence. The king's expression grew darker with each revelation. "Eastern nightshade," he repeated grimly. "The same poison that killed Princess Alara?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Lord Varen said possession alone would suggest guilt, and they planned to forge love letters between Lady Josiane and Duke Roderick. Silence. The king held up a hand, his mind working rapidly. He moved to his window and peered down at the courtyard, where the first hints of gray touched the eastern sky. "Dawn approaches. If they move tonight, we have perhaps an hour." He strode to his desk and began writing rapidly. "Mira, that is your name? You have done a great service to the realm tonight. I will not forget it." He sealed the first message with his personal seal and began another. "Can you find Lord Elkar's chambers without being seen?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "Good. Give him this message and tell him to act immediately." He handed her the sealed parchment. "Then find Captain Torres of the Palace Guard. Wake him if necessary and give him this." The second message joined the first. As Mira prepared to leave, the king caught her arm gently. "One more thing. Say nothing of this to anyone else. Your life depends on absolute secrecy." The girl nodded and slipped back into the shadowy corridors. King Aaron stood alone for a moment, weighing his options. Then he dressed quickly and made his way through the palace passages toward the healer's hall. He found Lady Josiane already awake, preparing herbal remedies by candlelight. She looked up in surprise as he entered. "Your Majesty? Is something wrong?" "Everything is wrong," he replied grimly. "Pack only what you cannot replace. You have perhaps 30 minutes before Lord Varen's agents arrive to plant evidence of treason in your chambers." Lady Josiane's face went white, but her hands remained steady. "Evidence of what nature?" "Eastern nightshade and forged correspondence suggesting you helped Duke Roderick poison his wife." The king began helping her gather her most precious medical texts. "They intend to destroy you to isolate Princess Helena." "And Helena herself?" "Safe for now, but not for long if we lose you." He paused in his packing, meeting her eyes directly. "Josiane, I need you to do something that will seem like abandonment, but is actually the deepest protection." She nodded, understanding immediately. "You want me to disappear before they can arrest me. Let them think their plan succeeded. More than that, I want you to become a secret guardian, someone they believe is gone, but who can continue Helena's education from the shadows." His expression grew fierce. "Let them think they have isolated her. Meanwhile, she will grow stronger under your hidden guidance." Lady Josiane smiled grimly as she secured her most important books in a traveling satchel. "A dangerous game, Your Majesty." "All games worth winning are dangerous." He handed her a pouch of coins and a sealed letter. "There is a safe house in the merchant quarter. The address is in that letter. Wait for my signal there." As they finished packing, the sound of marching feet echoed in the distant quarters. Lord Varen's agents were coming. Helena arrived at the healer's hall just as the sun crested the palace walls, expecting to find Lady Josiane preparing their morning lessons. Instead, she found chaos. Palace guards swarmed through the chamber, led by Captain Torres, who looked genuinely distressed as he overturned shelves and examined every bottle and vial. Lord Varon stood in the corner, his face a mask of righteous concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Princess Helena," Captain Torres said heavily when he noticed her in the doorway, "I'm afraid there has been a terrible discovery." Helena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Where is Lady Josiane?" "Gone." Lord Varon stepped forward, holding a small, violet vial that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. "Fled in the night after we discovered this hidden in her private quarters. Eastern nightshade, the same poison that killed your dear mother." The world tilted beneath Helena's feet. "That's impossible. Lady Josiane would never—" "I'm afraid there's more." Varon produced a bundle of letters tied with pink ribbon. "Love letters between Lady Josiane and your father, dating back 3 years. It appears she helped him eliminate his wife so they could be together." Helena stared at the letters, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. The handwriting looked exactly like Lady Josiane's careful script. Captain Torres cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Princess, I know this is shocking, but the evidence is quite clear. Lady Josiane had means, motive, and opportunity. When we came to arrest her at dawn, she had vanished completely." "Her guilt is obvious," Varon added smoothly. "No innocent person flees in the night." Helena felt something breaking inside her chest. Not just grief, but a fundamental trust in her ability to judge people. If Lady Josiane could betray her so completely, how could she trust anyone? King Aaron appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous as he surveyed the scene. "What is the meaning of this disturbance?" Lord Varon bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, we have uncovered terrible treachery. Lady Josiane has been revealed as the true architect of Princess Ilara's murder, acting in conspiracy with Duke Roderick." The king examined the vial and letters with appropriate shock and disgust. Helena watched his face carefully, looking for some sign that this was all a mistake, some indication that he doubted the evidence. But his expression remained grimly convinced. "This explains much," the king said finally. "The timing of the princess's isolation, the systematic undermining of her confidence. Lady Josiane was positioning herself as Helena's sole trusted advisor." Helena felt the floor falling away beneath her. Even the king believed it. "What would you have done once you gained complete influence over the princess?" King Aaron asked, though Lady Josiane was no longer there to answer. Lord Varon answered instead. "Perhaps convinced her to renounce her claims voluntarily. A broken, friendless girl might be persuaded that she was unworthy of royal responsibility." The words hit Helena like physical blows. Was that what Lady Josiane had been doing? Gaining her trust only to destroy her from within? "Princess," the king said gently, "I know this is devastating. But you must understand, you can trust no one completely. This conspiracy reaches deeper than we imagined." Helena nodded numbly, but inside something fierce and cold was crystallizing. If she could trust no one, then she would depend only on herself. If everyone around her might be a traitor, then she would become strong enough to stand alone. "I want to continue my studies," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "If Lady Josiane was trying to manipulate my education, then I need to learn the truth for myself." Lord Varon's eyes flashed with what might have been satisfaction, though his expression remained sympathetic. "Of course, Princess, though perhaps you should have proper supervision, someone beyond suspicion." "I will oversee her education personally," King Aaron declared, "at least until we can find another trustworthy tutor." As the guards finished their search and filed out, Helena remained standing in the ruins of what had felt like her first real sanctuary. Lord Varon approached her with apparent kindness. "Princess, if I may offer counsel, do not let this betrayal harden your heart completely. There are still those worthy of your trust." His red ring caught the morning light as he gestured. "I have served the crown faithfully for 20 years. Should you ever need guidance?" Helena looked into his concerned face and felt nothing but emptiness. "Thank you, Lord Varon. I will remember your offer." But as he left, she found herself studying the way he walked, the set of his shoulders, the timing of his arrival at the scene. Something about his performance felt rehearsed. Too perfect, too convenient. For the first time since entering the palace, Helena began to truly think like her mother's daughter. 3 days after Lady Josiane's disappearance, Helena sat alone in the scriptoria, surrounded by law books and her mother's journals. The king had given her access to advanced text, trusting her to study independently while he managed the growing investigation. But Helena wasn't just studying law anymore. She was studying the evidence. The love letters lay spread across her desk, the ones that supposedly proved Lady Josiane's guilt. Helena examined each page with the analytical mind her mother had passed down to her, and slowly inconsistencies began to emerge. The handwriting was perfect, too perfect. Every letter formed exactly as Lady Josiane would write it, with none of the small variations that naturally occurred when someone wrote quickly or emotionally. It was as if someone had painstakingly copied her script rather than writing naturally. More tellingly, the paper itself felt wrong. Helena held one letter up to the light and frowned. The watermark showed a swan, the symbol of House Brightwater, her mother's family. But why would Lady Josiane use Helena's family stationery for love letters to Duke Roderick? She opened one of her mother's law books and found a section on document forgery. Princess Alara had annotated it heavily, noting techniques used by corrupt scribes to create false evidence. One passage made Helena's breath catch. The forger's greatest weakness is perfection. Authentic documents contain natural flaws, ink blots, crossed out words, varying pressure. A document that is too clean is often too false. Helena examined the letters again. Not a single crossed out word, not one ink blot or smudge, no variation in the pressure of the pen strokes. They were impossibly pristine. She was so absorbed in her analysis that she didn't notice the figure in the doorway until he spoke. Fascinating reading, Princess? Helena looked up to find Lord Varon watching her with keen interest. She quickly closed the law book, but left the letters visible. Let him think she still believed them genuine. I was trying to understand, she said carefully, how someone I trusted could betray me so completely. Varon entered the room, his red ring catching the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. Betrayal is one of life's harshest lessons, Princess, but perhaps a necessary one for someone in your position. My position? As heir to significant responsibilities. He moved closer, studying the texts on her desk. I see you're reading advanced legal theory. Admirable dedication, though I wonder if it's wise to pursue such intensive study while grieving. Helena felt a chill at his tone. King Aaron believes education will help me heal. Of course, though I hope you're not developing unhealthy suspicions about those around you. Grief can sometimes make us see conspiracies where none exist. The comment was casual, but Helena caught the warning beneath it. He was watching her, measuring her responses, testing whether she suspected the truth about the letters. Oh no, my lord, she said, carefully injecting pain into her voice. If anything, Lady Josiane's betrayal has taught me to trust more carefully. I won't make the same mistake again. Varon's expression relaxed slightly. Wisdom beyond your years, Princess. Though I hope you won't become too isolated. A young woman needs guidance, especially one facing such significant decisions in the coming months. Another warning. He was reminding her that her 17th birthday approached, and with it, her claim to champion the people's court. What sort of decisions, my lord? Well, there's the matter of your eventual role at court. Some might argue that someone so young, so inexperienced, shouldn't bear the full weight of ancient responsibilities. Perhaps a gradual transition would be wiser, shared authority with more experienced advisors. Helena felt her mother's fierce spirit stirring within her. Varon was already positioning himself to control her power, to convince her she was too weak, too damaged to claim her full heritage. That's very thoughtful, she said meekly. I confess, after Lady Josiane's betrayal, I feel quite unprepared for any significant responsibilities. Understandable, Varon said, satisfaction creeping into his voice. When the time comes, I hope you'll remember that some of us have served the crown faithfully for decades. We have experience in managing complex legal matters. After he left, Helena sat in the growing shadows, her mind racing. Varon's visit confirmed what she'd begun to suspect. The conspiracy wasn't over. It had simply moved to a new phase. They believed they had broken her spirit and isolated her from protection. Now they were working to convince her to surrender her power voluntarily. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. In trying to destroy her trust in others, they had forced her to trust herself. And herself, she was discovering, was far stronger than they had imagined it. Helena opened her mother's journal to a page she had marked earlier and read aloud in the empty room. The greatest weapon against corruption is not force, but truth meticulously gathered and precisely applied. A single authentic fact can topple an empire of lies. She looked down at the forged letters and smiled grimly. She was going to find that authentic fact, no matter what it cost her. That evening, Helena made a decision that would have terrified her a week ago, but now felt as natural as breathing. She was going to investigate Lady Joseon's chambers herself. The guards had sealed the room after their search, but Helena knew the palace's servant passages better than most nobles realized. During her years of isolation at her father's manor, she had learned to move unseen, a skill that served her well now as she navigated the narrow corridors that honeycombed the palace walls. The passage behind Lady Joseon's chambers was dusty and cramped, designed for servants to tend fireplaces and clean rooms without disturbing their occupants. Helena pressed her eye to one of the observation slots and peered into the darkened room. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the chaos left by the guards' search. Books scattered across the floor, furniture overturned, bottles and vials examined and abandoned. But Helena wasn't looking for what the guards had found. She was looking for what they had missed. She squeezed through the servants' entrance, a hidden panel behind a tapestry that most people never noticed. The room felt hollow without Lady Joseon's warm presence, but Helena forced herself to focus on her task. Moving methodically through the debris, she examined everything with new eyes. The guards had been looking for evidence of guilt. Helena was looking for evidence of innocence, and slowly she began to find it. In the cold fireplace, she discovered fragments of burned parchment that the guards had overlooked. Most were too damaged to read, but one piece bore part of a date, written in Lady Joseon's authentic handwriting, with all the natural imperfections that the forged letters lacked. The date was from 2 weeks ago, but the fragment showed Lady Joseon writing about preparing lessons for Helena's legal education. Helena carefully wrapped the fragment in her handkerchief. It was small evidence, but authentic, proof that Lady Joseon had been genuinely committed to her education, not manipulating her. As she continued searching, Helena noticed something odd about the room's layout. The space felt smaller than it should, given the exterior dimensions she remembered from the quarters. She began measuring with her steps, comparing the internal space to what she knew of the external walls. There was a discrepancy. Nearly 6 feet of space was unaccounted for. Helena began examining the walls more carefully, running her hands along the paneling, just as she had seen her mother do when searching for hidden compartments in legal documents. Behind a bookshelf that had been pushed askew during the search, her fingers found what felt like a seam in the wood. Pressing carefully along the edges, she heard a soft click. A section of the panel swung inward, revealing a narrow space barely wide enough for a person to stand. Helena retrieved a candle from the main room and stepped inside. The hidden chamber was clearly Lady Joseon's true study. Unlike the outer room, which had contained general medical texts, this space held the dangerous knowledge. Books on toxicology, yes, but also treatises on detecting poisons, antidotes, and forensic analysis. More importantly, it contained detailed notes in Lady Joseon's handwriting about the symptoms Princess Alara had exhibited before her death. Helena read by candlelight, her heart pounding with each revelation. Lady Joseon hadn't been learning to create poisons. She had been investigating Princess Alara's murder. Her notes detailed inconsistencies in the official account of the death, questions about the timing of symptoms, and most damning of all, a list of people who had access to Princess Alara's food and drink on the night she died. Lord Varen's name was at the top of the list, circled multiple times, but the most shocking discovery was yet to come. In a locked drawer, easily opened with a hairpin, another skill from Helena's isolated years, she found copies of correspondence between Lady Joseon and King Aaron. The letters revealed the truth that made Helena's knees weak with relief and fury in equal measure. Lady Joseon was alive. Not only alive, but working secretly with the king to investigate the conspiracy. Her disappearance had been orchestrated to protect her and to make the conspirators believe their plan had succeeded. The most recent letter, dated just yesterday, contained Lady Joseon's analysis of the forged love letters. The paper is incorrect. Brightwater stationery would never have been available to me for personal correspondence. More tellingly, the ink composition is wrong. I have never used iron gall ink, which leaves a distinctive brownish tint as it ages. These letters were written with oak gall ink and artificially aged with diluted tea, a common forger's technique. Helena sat in the hidden chamber, surrounded by the evidence of Lady Joseon's innocence and dedication, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that her mentor hadn't betrayed her, fury that she had been manipulated into believing the worst, but also, for the first time in days, hope. She wasn't alone. Lady Joseon was still fighting for her, still protecting her, even from the shadows. And King Aaron was orchestrating a careful counter-conspiracy, using the enemy's tactics against them. But as Helena prepared to leave, she heard footsteps in the outer chamber. Heavy boots, guards' boots, and the sound of multiple people entering the sealed room. She quickly extinguished her candle and pressed herself against the back wall of the hidden chamber, listening intently. "Search again," came Lord Varen's voice, tight with frustration. "She was in here tonight. My sources are certain." Helena's blood turned to ice. Somehow Varen knew she had been investigating. "My lord?" came Captain Torres's voice, sounding troubled. "The room has been sealed. No one could have entered without using the servant passages," Varen finished coldly. "The fat little princess is cleverer than she appears. Find evidence that she was here. If she's beginning to question the official story, we need to know how much she's discovered." Helena held her breath as the sounds of a new search began. This time the guards were looking for signs of her presence, not evidence against Lady Joseon. She heard furniture being moved, floorboards being examined for footprints, even the tapestries being pulled aside. "Here," came a guard's voice from near the servants' entrance. "Fresh disturbances in the dust. Someone used this passage recently." "And here," another voice added, "candle wax on the floor, still warm." Lord Varen's voice carried a note of dangerous satisfaction. "Princess Helena has been a busy student indeed. Captain Torres, I want guards posted at every servant entrance. If she tries this again, she will be caught." "My lord," Torres said carefully, "perhaps we should inform King Aaron that the princess has been—" "The king has enough concerns without worrying about a grief-stricken girl's midnight wanderings," Varen interrupted smoothly. "I will handle this matter personally. For now, simply ensure she cannot repeat tonight's adventure." As the search party finally left, Helena remained frozen in her hiding place for what felt like hours. When she finally dared to emerge, she realized the full gravity of her situation. Varen knew she was investigating. He would be watching her more carefully now, looking for signs that she suspected the truth about Lady Joseon's innocence. But she had learned something crucial tonight. The conspiracy was larger and more desperate than she had realized. If Varen was posting guards to prevent her from gathering evidence, it meant there was more evidence to find, and that the conspirators were afraid of what she might discover. As Helena made her careful way back through the servant passages to her own chambers, she carried with her not just Lady Joseon's hidden letters and the burned parchment fragment, but something more valuable. The knowledge that she was not fighting this battle alone. Lady Joseon was out there, somewhere in the shadows, continuing to investigate and protect her. King Aaron was playing a deeper game than anyone realized, using the enemy's expectations against them. And Helena herself was becoming something the conspirators hadn't planned for. Not a broken, isolated victim, but a scholar detective determined to honor her mother's legacy by uncovering the truth, no matter how dangerous the path. Tomorrow she would have to be even more careful. Varen would be watching for signs that she suspected the deception. She would need to appear convinced of Lady Joseon's guilt while secretly gathering more evidence of her innocence. But tonight, for the first time since Lady Joseon's disappearance, Helena fell asleep with something approaching peace in her heart. The game was far from over, and she was finally beginning to understand the rules. More importantly, she was beginning to understand that she had inherited more from her mother than just legal rights and ancient bloodlines. She had inherited the mind of an investigator, the heart of a protector, and the will to see justice done, no matter what the cost. In her dreams, she heard her mother's voice reading from the old law books. "Truth is not a destination, my dear one. Truth is a journey that requires courage, patience, and the willingness to see clearly even when others choose blindness. When Helena woke the next morning, those words would guide every choice she made, every risk she took, and every step she took toward reclaiming not just her birthright, but her role as the champion of justice her people desperately needed. The next morning brought an unexpected development that would change everything. Helena was studying in the scriptoria when Lord Elcar arrived with an armful of legal documents and an expression of barely contained excitement. "Princess," he said, glancing around to ensure they were alone, "I have discovered something remarkable. His Majesty has authorized me to share it with you as it pertains directly to your upcoming legal responsibilities." Helena looked up from her mother's annotated copy of Principles of Royal Justice, careful to keep her expression neutral, despite the curiosity burning within her. Since discovering the truth about Lady Josiane's disappearance, every interaction felt like a performance where the wrong word could expose everything. "What have you found, Lord Elcar?" The scholar spread a collection of ancient documents across the reading table with reverent care. "While researching the historical precedents for the People's Court, I uncovered a provision that has been overlooked for nearly 2 centuries. Princess, are you familiar with the concept of the People's Gallery?" Helena shook her head, but something in her mother's writing stirred in her memory, a reference to voices of the common folk that she hadn't fully understood. "The People's Gallery," Lord Elcar explained, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher sharing a profound secret, "was established by Queen Lyanna alongside the People's Court. It grants any citizen, regardless of birth, wealth, or station, the right to present testimony directly to the champion of Brightwater blood. Not just testimony about their own cases, but testimony about corruption, injustice, and abuse of power they have witnessed." Helena felt her pulse quicken. Any citizen can speak directly to the champion? More than speak, they can demand investigation. If 3 or more citizens present corroborating testimony about the same matter, the champion is legally bound to pursue formal inquiry. Lord Elcar's eyes gleamed with scholarly fervor. "Princess, do you understand what this means?" Helena was beginning to, and the implications were staggering. "It means that once I come of age and claim my role as champion, I won't have to rely solely on official court records or noble testimony. I can hear directly from the people who have been harmed." "Precisely, and there's more. The People's Gallery supersedes normal court hierarchy. If a duke is accused by 3 citizens with corroborating testimony, the champion has authority to investigate that duke, regardless of his political connections or influence." Helena stared at the ancient documents, her mind racing. This was why the conspiracy existed. It wasn't just about preventing her from championing individual cases. It was about preventing her from uncovering systematic corruption that might implicate dozens of nobles across the realm. "Lord Elcar," she said carefully, "has word of this discovery spread beyond the king's inner circle?" The scholar's expression grew cautious. "His Majesty instructed me to share it only with you for now. He believes that certain parties might misunderstand the implications if news spread prematurely." Translation: they were keeping this secret from Lord Varon and his conspirators. Helena felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. This provision could be the weapon they needed to expose the conspiracy, but it also made her even more dangerous to her enemies. "There's something else," Lord Elcar continued, lowering his voice. "While researching in the archives, I discovered that several citizens have already attempted to approach the crown with testimony about corruption, only to be turned away by various court officials who claim no legal mechanism existed for such testimony." Helena's breath caught. They were lying about the law? Either lying or genuinely ignorant, though given the sophistication of some recent legal manipulations we've encountered, I suspect the former. Lord Elcar pulled out a leather portfolio. "I took the liberty of tracking down 3 of these citizens. With His Majesty's permission, they are waiting in the small council chamber to speak with you." Helena's heart hammered against her ribs. "You want me to hear testimony now? Before my birthday?" "The law is unclear about preliminary hearings," Lord Elcar admitted. "You cannot make binding rulings until you formally claim the role, but there's nothing preventing you from gathering information. Think of it as educational preparation for your future responsibilities." Helena understood. They were building a case in secret, gathering evidence and testimony that would be ready to deploy the moment she came of age, but they were also taking an enormous risk. If Varen discovered what they were doing, the consequences would be swift and deadly. Who are these witnesses, she asked. A merchant named Thomas Crowfield, whose daughter was falsely accused of theft by a lord who wanted his shop. A farmer's wife named Sarah Millhaven, who watched her husband's land be seized through forged documents. And most relevantly, a young clerk named Marcus Fairfax, who worked in the archives and witnessed certain documents being altered. The last name made Helena's pulse spike. A clerk who had witnessed document forgery, exactly the kind of testimony that could expose Varen's methods. Lord Elcar, she said slowly, if I hear this testimony, will you take detailed notes? Create an official record? Of course, though such records would need to be kept secure until you can act upon them legally. Helena made her decision. Then let's proceed. But first, is the small council chamber private enough for sensitive testimony? Lord Elcar smiled grimly. His Majesty had it swept for listening devices and potential eavesdroppers this morning. We are as secure as possible under the circumstances. 20 minutes later, Helena found herself seated at the head of a polished oak table in a chamber she had never entered before. Tall windows looked out over the palace gardens, but heavy curtains could be drawn for privacy. Lord Elcar sat to her right with writing materials, and King Aeron himself stood by the door, not as participant, but as silent guardian. The three witnesses entered with obvious nervousness, clearly awed by their surroundings but determined to speak their truths. Helena studied each face, seeing in their expressions the weight of injustices they had carried in silence. Thomas Crowfield spoke first. He was a man of perhaps 40 years with calloused hands and worried eyes. Your Highness, he began, I thank you for this chance. For 2 years I have tried to find someone who would listen. I'm listening now, Helena said gently, surprised by how natural it felt to speak with the authority her bloodline carried. Tell me what happened to your daughter. My Lyanna, she's only 14, Your Highness, was accused of stealing a silver bracelet from Lady Morwen's personal chambers, but the accusation was false, designed to force me to sell my shop at a fraction of its value to avoid having my daughter imprisoned. Helena's blood chilled. Lady Morwen, one of the 5 conspirators she had overheard in the wine cellar meeting. Continue, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The bracelet was planted in Lyanna's market basket by one of Lady Morwen's servants. I know this because another servant, one with a conscience, told me the truth afterward. But when I tried to present this testimony to the local magistrate, he claimed no legal provision existed for challenging a noble's accusation based on servant testimony. That's false, Helena said immediately. The Code of Equal Justice, established in the reign of King Marcus the Just, explicitly allows servant testimony in cases involving their employers, provided the testimony is given under oath and penalty of perjury. Thomas Crowfield's eyes widened with hope. Then my daughter could be cleared? Once I formally claim my role as champion, yes. But for now, I need you to tell Lord Elcar everything. The names of all involved, the dates, the details of the attempted coercion. We'll build a complete record. As Thomas provided his detailed testimony, Helena felt something awakening within her that went beyond personal vindication or family legacy. This was what her power was truly meant for, giving voice to those who had been silenced, providing justice to those who had been denied it. Sarah Millhaven's story was similarly heartbreaking. Her husband's farm had been seized through documents that claimed he owed massive debts to Lord Brennan, another conspirator. But the debt documents bore signatures that Sarah swore were forgeries, as her husband had been injured and unable to write for months when the papers were supposedly signed. I tried to present evidence of his injury to the debt hearings, Sarah explained, tears streaming down her weathered face. The healer's records, witnesses who could testify about his condition. But Lord Brennan's magistrate claimed that noble testimony outweighed commoner testimony in matters of debt. Also false, Helena said, her anger growing with each revelation. The Commercial Justice Act clearly states that physical evidence and medical testimony carry equal weight to verbal claims, regardless of the social status of the parties involved. But it was Marcus Fairfax's testimony that provided the most damning evidence. The young clerk, pale and trembling with fear, described systematic document alteration in the archives under Lord Varen's direction. "Your Highness," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I witnessed Lord Varen personally altering legal precedents, changing the wording of ancient laws to make them appear more restrictive than they actually were. He was particularly focused on anything related to bloodline rights in the People's Court." Helena leaned forward intently. "Can you be specific about what was changed?" "Yes, Your Highness. I kept personal notes hidden in my lodgings because I feared what I was witnessing. Lord Varen altered Queen Liana's original charter to make it appear that the champion's authority was more limited than it actually is. He removed references to the People's Gallery entirely from several copies." And Marcus hesitated, glancing nervously at the king. "Continue," Helena urged. "You're under my protection." "He forged entirely new documents that seemed to give regional nobles more authority to override royal justice. Documents that were then used to justify local magistrates dismissing cases like the ones Master Crowfield and Mistress Millhaven described." The room fell silent as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't just about preventing Helena from claiming her birthright. It was about systematically undermining the entire foundation of equal justice in the realm. Lord Elcar looked up from his frantic note-taking. "Marcus, do you still have these personal records?" "Yes, my lord. Hidden but safe. Though," he looked around fearfully, "I believe Lord Varen suspects I know too much. I've been followed recently, and my supervisor has been asking unusual questions about my work schedule." King Aeron spoke for the first time. "Marcus, how would you feel about taking an extended leave from the archives? Perhaps visiting family in a distant province until Princess Helena's birthday?" The young man's relief was palpable. "I would be grateful, Your Majesty, though I worry about what might happen to the evidence I've gathered." "That evidence," Helena said firmly, "will be kept safe until I can act upon it officially. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. Once I become champion, I will need you to testify publicly about what you witnessed. That will require courage." Marcus straightened, some of his fear transforming into determination. "Your Highness, I became an archivist because I believe in preserving truth. If my testimony can help restore justice, I will provide it, no matter the personal cost." As the witnesses were escorted out through separate exits, another security precaution, Helena remained seated at the council table, overwhelmed by what she had learned. The conspiracy was vast, touching every level of the justice system, denying fair treatment to countless citizens across the realm. But she was no longer the isolated, broken girl her enemies believed her to be. She had allies, evidence, and most importantly, a clear understanding of her true purpose. In less than 6 months, she would claim not just her birthright, but the power to dismantle the entire corrupt network that had poisoned the realm's justice system. Lord Elcar gathered his extensive notes. "Princess, this testimony provides an excellent foundation for future prosecutions. Once you're formally invested as champion, you'll have grounds to investigate not just individual cases of corruption, but the systematic subversion of royal justice." Helena nodded, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the testimonies began. "Lord Elcar, in your research, did you find any reference to what happens when the champion discovers that sitting nobles have committed treason through their corruption?" The scholar's expression grew grave. "Yes, Princess. The champion's authority in cases of noble treason is comprehensive. You would have the power to strip titles, confiscate lands, and order imprisonment. In the most severe cases, you could recommend execution, subject to the king's final approval." Helena looked at King Aeron, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, but whose expression left no doubt about his feelings regarding the conspirators. "Your Majesty," she said formally, "when the time comes to act upon this evidence, will I have the crown's full support?" "Princess Helena," the king replied with quiet intensity, "you will have not just my support, but my gratitude. These men and women have perverted the very foundations of justice in our realm. When you bring them to account, you will be serving not just your own destiny, but the welfare of every citizen who has suffered under their corruption." As Helena returned to her chambers that evening, her mind buzzed with plans and possibilities. She had testimony, evidence, and growing understanding of the legal weapons at her disposal, but she also had a clearer picture of the danger she faced. The conspirators weren't just trying to prevent her from claiming power. They were trying to preserve a system of corruption that enriched them while impoverishing justice itself. The next few months would require careful planning, secret preparation, and above all, the strength to maintain her facade of ignorance while building an unassailable case against her enemies. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Helena felt equal to the challenge. She was her mother's daughter, heir to Queen Lyanna's legacy, and champion of justice for all who had been denied it. The conspirators had created their own destruction by forcing her to become exactly what they feared most. Not just a figurehead with ancient rights, but a true protector of the people, armed with evidence, allies, and an unshakable determination to see justice done. Lady Josiane pulled her hooded cloak tighter as she made her way through the narrow streets of the merchant quarter, her practiced eyes scanning for signs of surveillance. This was what her power was truly meant for, giving voice to those who had been silenced, providing justice to those who had been denied it. Sarah Millhaven's story was similarly heartbreaking. Her husband's farm had been seized through documents that claimed he owed massive debts to Lord Brennan, another conspirator. But the debt documents bore signatures that Sarah swore were forgeries, as her husband had been injured and unable to write for months when the papers were supposedly signed. I tried to present evidence of his injury to the debt hearings, Sarah explained, tears streaming down her weathered face. The healer's records, witnesses who could testify about his condition. But Lord Brennan's magistrate claimed that noble testimony outweighed commoner testimony in matters of debt. Also false, Helena said, her anger growing with each revelation. The Commercial Justice Act clearly states that physical evidence and medical testimony carry equal weight to verbal claims, regardless of the social status of the parties involved. But it was Marcus Fairfax's testimony that provided the most damning evidence. The young clerk, pale and trembling with fear, described systematic document alteration in the archives under Lord Varen's direction. "Your Highness," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I witnessed Lord Varen personally altering legal precedents, changing the wording of ancient laws to make them appear more restrictive than they actually were. He was particularly focused on anything related to bloodline rights in the People's Court." Helena leaned forward intently. "Can you be specific about what was changed?" "Yes, Your Highness. I kept personal notes hidden in my lodgings because I feared what I was witnessing. Lord Varen altered Queen Lyanna's original charter to make it appear that the champion's authority was more limited than it actually is. He removed references to the People's Gallery entirely from several copies. And," Marcus hesitated, glancing nervously at the king. "Continue," Helena urged. "You're under my protection." "He forged entirely new documents that seemed to give regional nobles more authority to override royal justice. Documents that were then used to justify local magistrates dismissing cases like the ones Master Crowfield and Mistress Millhaven described." The room fell silent as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't just about preventing Helena from claiming her birthright. It was about systematically undermining the entire foundation of equal justice in the realm. Lord Elcar looked up from his frantic note-taking. "Marcus, do you still have these personal records?" "Yes, my lord. Hidden but safe. Though," he looked around fearfully, "I believe Lord Varen suspects I know too much. I've been followed recently, and my supervisor has been asking unusual questions about my work schedule." King Aeron spoke for the first time. "Marcus, how would you feel about taking an extended leave from the archives? Perhaps visiting family in a distant province until Princess Helena's birthday?" The young man's relief was palpable. "I would be grateful, Your Majesty, though I worry about what might happen to the evidence I've gathered." "That evidence," Helena said firmly, "will be kept safe until I can act upon it officially. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. Once I become champion, I will need you to testify publicly about what you witnessed. That will require courage." Marcus straightened, some of his fear transforming into determination. "Your Highness, I became an archivist because I believe in preserving truth. If my testimony can help restore justice, I will provide it, no matter the personal cost." As the witnesses were escorted out through separate exits, another security precaution, Helena remained seated at the council table, overwhelmed by what she had learned. The conspiracy was vast, touching every level of the justice system, denying fair treatment to countless citizens across the realm. But she was no longer the isolated, broken girl her enemies believed her to be. She had allies, evidence, and most importantly, a clear understanding of her true purpose. In less than 6 months, she would claim not just her birthright, but the power to dismantle the entire corrupt network that had poisoned the realm's justice system. Lord Elcar gathered his extensive notes. Princess, this testimony provides an excellent foundation for future prosecutions. Once you're formally invested as champion, you'll have grounds to investigate not just individual cases of corruption, but the systematic subversion of royal justice. Helena nodded, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the testimonies began. Lord Elcar, in your research, did you find any reference to what happens when the champion discovers that sitting nobles have committed treason through their corruption? The scholar's expression grew grave. Yes, Princess. The champion's authority in cases of noble treason is comprehensive. You would have the power to strip titles, confiscate lands, and order imprisonment. In the most severe cases, you could recommend execution, subject to the king's final approval. Helena looked at King Aaron, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, but whose expression left no doubt about his feelings regarding the conspirators. Your Majesty, she said formally, when the time comes to act upon this evidence, will I have the crown's full support? Princess Helena, the king replied with quiet intensity, you will have not just my support, but my gratitude. These men and women have perverted the very foundations of justice in our realm. When you bring them to account, you will be serving not just your own destiny, but the welfare of every citizen who has suffered under their corruption. As Helena returned to her chambers that evening, her mind buzzed with plans and possibilities. She had testimony, evidence, and growing understanding of the legal weapons at her disposal. But she also had a clearer picture of the danger she faced. The conspirators weren't just trying to prevent her from claiming power. They were trying to preserve a system of corruption that enriched them while impoverishing justice itself. The next few months would require careful planning, secret preparation, and above all, the strength to maintain her facade of ignorance while building an unassailable case against her enemies. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Helena felt equal to the challenge. She was her mother's daughter, heir to Queen Lyanna's legacy, and champion of justice for all who had been denied it. The conspirators had created their own destruction by forcing her to become exactly what they feared most. Not just a figurehead with ancient rights, but a true protector of the people, armed with evidence, allies, and an unshakable determination to see justice done. Lady Josiane pulled her hooded cloak tighter as she made her way through the narrow streets of the merchant quarter, her practiced eyes scanning for signs of surveillance. 3 weeks had passed since her staged disappearance, and she had used every moment to build a network of informants, gather evidence, and prepare for the next phase of their campaign against the conspiracy. The safe house King Aaron had provided was modest but strategically located, a converted apartment above a scribe's shop, with multiple exit routes and a perfect view of the palace walls. More importantly, it was owned by Thomas Inkwell, an elderly scribe whose loyalty to the crown ran deeper than blood after King Aaron had personally intervened to save his grandson from false charges years ago. "My lady," Thomas greeted her as she entered through the shop's rear entrance. "You have visitors." Lady Josiane's hand moved instinctively to the knife concealed beneath her cloak. "Visitors?" "Friends," Thomas assured her quickly. "They bear the Raven seal." Relief flooded through her as she recognized the code phrase that indicated King Aaron's agents. She climbed the narrow stairs to find 2 figures waiting in her makeshift laboratory. Captain Torres, looking uncomfortable in civilian clothes, and Marcus Fairfax, the young archives clerk whose testimony had provided such crucial evidence. "Captain," she said warmly, "I assume you bring word from His Majesty?" Torres nodded grimly. "The situation is escalating, my lady. Lord Varen grows increasingly suspicious of Princess Helena's activities. He's requested permission to assign personal guards to protect her, guards drawn from men loyal to him rather than the crown. Lady Josiane felt ice form in her stomach. The king refused, I hope? For now, but Varin is building a case that Helena is mentally unstable, grief-stricken to the point of paranoia. He suggested that her midnight wanderings and obsessive studying indicate she's becoming a danger to herself and others. Marcus Fairfax spoke up, his young voice tight with fear and determination. My lady, there's more. Before I was relocated, I managed to overhear a conversation between Lord Varin and someone I couldn't see clearly. They're planning something called the final solution for just after the winter solstice, still months before the princess's birthday. Lady Josiane began pacing the small room, her medical mind analyzing the implications. They can't risk waiting until she comes of age. The testimony we've been gathering, the evidence that's accumulating, they must suspect that their deception regarding my supposed guilt isn't holding. There's something else, Captain Torres continued. The king has received intelligence that Lord Varin has been in communication with certain Morin nobles, specifically those who would benefit from seeing our realm's legal system remain corrupted and manipulable. Foreign involvement? Lady Josiane's eyes sharpened. That changes everything. This isn't just domestic corruption. It's potential treason at the highest levels. Marcus pulled a leather portfolio from his traveling bag. My lady, these are the documents I managed to smuggle out of the archives before my departure. They show a pattern of legal changes that goes back nearly 5 years. Always small alterations, but collectively they've undermined dozens of fundamental protections. Lady Josiane spread the documents across her work table, her physician's training and careful observation serving her well as she studied the evidence of systematic legal sabotage. Remarkable work, Marcus. This level of detailed forgery would require not just access to the archives, but intimate knowledge of legal language, historical precedents, and document aging techniques. That's what troubles me most, Marcus replied. Lord Varin couldn't have done this alone. The scope of the alterations suggests at least 3 or 4 people with advanced scholarly training were involved. Captain Torres leaned forward intently. Could you identify these other participants? Possibly. I kept careful notes about which sections of the archives were accessed by whom. If I could cross-reference those records with the altered documents. Marcus trailed off, his face paling. But that would require returning to the archives, and Lord Varin has certainly noticed my absence by now. Lady Josiane studied the young man's earnest face, seeing in his expression the same dedication to truth that had driven her own investigation into Princess Hilara's murder. Marcus, what would you say if I told you there might be another way to gather that evidence? I would say that I'm willing to take any risk necessary to see justice done, my lady. Good, because I have a proposal that will require considerable courage from all of us. And then Princess Helena stops pretending to be a broken, isolated victim and reveals herself as what she truly is, a royal prosecutor armed with evidence, witnesses, and legal authority that supersedes every corrupt noble in the realm. As the 3 conspirators finalized their plans for Marcus's dangerous return to the archives, none of them noticed the small figure perched in the branches of a tree outside the window. The same page who had observed Helena's legal education sessions now listened intently to every word of their plotting. Within the hour, Lord Varin would know that his enemies were preparing to invoke an ancient law that could destroy his conspiracy entirely. The race was now between Marcus's mission to gather evidence and Varin's desperate attempt to eliminate Helena before she could use that evidence. But Varin had made one crucial miscalculation. He still believed Helena was an isolated, naive girl who could be manipulated or frightened into submission. He had no idea that she had become something far more dangerous. A determined young woman who understood her power, trusted her allies, and was ready to use every legal weapon at her disposal to see justice done. The next few days would determine not just Helena's fate, but the fate of justice itself in the realm. And deep in the palace scriptorium, Helena continued her studies, unaware that her secret allies were preparing to give her the evidence she needed to transform from victim to victor in the most important legal battle of her life. The game had become deadly serious, and every player was preparing for moves that would determine the fate of the kingdom itself. Lord Varin stood in his private study, the coded report from his spy clutched in his trembling hands. The candlelight cast harsh shadows across his angular features as he read the devastating news. Lady Josiane was alive. Princess Helena knew the truth about the forged evidence. And worst of all, they were preparing to invoke the emergency powers provision. Impossible, he whispered to himself. But even as he spoke, his scholarly mind was already calculating the implications. If Helena could prove immediate mortal danger, she would gain legal authority that could destroy not just him, but the entire network of corruption they had spent years building. He moved to a hidden panel behind his bookshelf and withdrew a leather portfolio containing the conspiracy's most sensitive documents. Inside were correspondence with foreign agents, detailed plans for systematic legal subversion, and most damning of all, orders for the assassinations that would follow Helena's neutralization. The winter solstice plan had been elegant in its simplicity, a carefully orchestrated accident that would eliminate Helena while she was traveling to what she believed would be a reconciliation meeting with distant relatives. No poison this time, no obvious murder, simply a tragic carriage accident on a mountain road, engineered by experts and witnessed by carefully coached observers. But if Helena invoked emergency powers, she could compel immediate protection, conduct investigations under royal authority, and worst of all, she could examine every document, question every witness, and unravel every thread of the conspiracy before they had a chance to eliminate her. Varon began burning documents, his hands working frantically as decades of careful corruption went up in flames. But even as he destroyed evidence, his mind was forming a new plan, desperate and dangerous, but potentially decisive. If Helena was preparing to invoke emergency powers based on evidence of immediate danger, then he would give her immediate danger beyond anything she had imagined. Meanwhile, in the palace archives, Marcus Fairfax adjusted his false beard and checked his forged credentials one final time. Thomas Inkwell's work was masterful. The documents identified him as Brother Benedict Quillwright, a monastic scholar researching historical precedents for a planned treatise on royal authority. The Night Guards knew him by reputation, having processed his research requests for several days. His methodical, scholarly approach had earned their respect, and more importantly, their trust. They no longer questioned his late-night presence in restricted sections. "Working late again, Brother Benedict?" asked Guard Captain Hollis as Marcus made his way toward the deepest archive of vaults. "The treatise demands thoroughness, Captain," Marcus replied in the slightly higher voice he had practiced. "Historical accuracy cannot be achieved through cursory examination." As he descended into the archives, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Somewhere above, Princess Helena was continuing her studies, unaware that her life hung in the balance. Lady Josiane and Captain Torres were preparing for the most dangerous legal gambit in the realm's history. And he was the linchpin. If he failed to gather the necessary evidence, their entire plan would collapse. The restricted vault contained the archive's most sensitive materials, original royal charters, diplomatic correspondence, and most relevantly, the personnel records that would reveal who had accessed which documents over the past 5 years. Marcus lit his carefully shielded oil lamp and began his methodical search. The personnel logs were maintained with bureaucratic precision, recording every scholar, clerk, and official who had examined specific documents. Cross-referencing these with the dates of known document alterations, a pattern quickly emerged. Lord Varon's name appeared repeatedly, of course, but so did 3 others: Master Aldrich Thornfield, the deputy keeper of historical precedents; Scholar Evelyn Morgate, specialist in legal interpretation; and most shockingly, Lord Brennan's son Geoffrey, who had no official reason to be accessing ancient legal charters. But the most damning discovery came when Marcus found a hidden cache of correspondence between these co-conspirators, carelessly stored in a misfiled folder that had escaped previous notice. The letters revealed not just the scope of their document forgery operation, but their connections to foreign agents and their detailed plans for eliminating anyone who threatened their network. One letter, dated just 2 weeks prior, made Marcus's blood run cold. "The girl's investigation progresses too quickly. Traditional methods have failed. Recommend implementing the Brightwater Protocol immediately after the winter feast. Coordination with our friends across the eastern border has been confirmed. The realm's legal system will be firmly under our control within 6 months." Marcus carefully transcribed every document, his hands steady despite the growing terror in his heart. The Brightwater Protocol, clearly a code name for Helena's assassination, was scheduled for just days after the winter solstice celebrations. They had even less time than anyone had realized. As he worked, Marcus became increasingly aware of sounds echoing from the archive levels above him. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose rather than the casual patrol patterns of the night guards. His scholar's mind processed the implications, even as his survival instincts screamed warnings. They had discovered his true identity. Varen's network was closing in. Marcus gathered the most crucial documents and tucked them inside his robes, then began moving toward the emergency exit Lady Josiane had made him memorize. But as he reached the stairwell, he heard voices that confirmed his worst fears. "Brother Benedict Quillwright doesn't exist," came Lord Varen's voice, cold with fury. "Thomas Inkwell's forgeries are masterful, but not perfect. Search every chamber, find Marcus Fairfax, and bring him to me alive. I want to know exactly what he's discovered." Marcus pressed himself against the wall, his mind racing through options. The main exits were clearly compromised, but the archives had been built with hidden passages designed for protecting precious documents during sieges. If he could reach one of those passages, he might escape with the evidence that could save Helena's life. Moving as silently as his archive training had taught him, Marcus made his way toward the ancient siege tunnels. Behind him, he could hear the systematic search growing closer, accompanied by the sound of documents being torn and scattered as Varen's agents destroyed evidence with desperate efficiency. He reached the hidden panel that concealed the tunnel entrance just as torchlight appeared at the far end of the corridor. With trembling fingers, Marcus triggered the mechanism Lady Josiane had taught him, and the panel swung open to reveal a narrow passage that led toward the palace's outer walls. As he squeezed into the tunnel, Marcus heard Varen's voice echoing through the archives. "Burn everything in the restricted sections. If we can't control the narrative, we'll eliminate it entirely." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. They weren't just trying to kill him, they were destroying centuries of historical records to prevent anyone else from uncovering the truth about their conspiracy. Marcus crawled through the tunnel with desperate speed, the precious documents pressed against his chest. Behind him, the orange glow of flames began to flicker through the archive chambers as Varen's agents methodically destroyed the realm's legal history. He emerged from the tunnel in a small maintenance shed outside the palace walls, gasping the cold night air and listening to the distant sounds of chaos from within the archives. Smoke was already beginning to rise from the ancient towers, and he could hear alarm bells beginning to toll as the fire spread. But Marcus had succeeded in his mission. Clutched in his hands were the documents that would prove the full scope of the conspiracy, identify all the co-conspirators, and most importantly, provide undeniable evidence of the immediate threat to Helena's life. Now he had to reach Lady Josiane before Varen's agents could track him down and silence him forever. In her chambers, Helena was awakened by the sound of alarm bells and the acrid smell of smoke drifting through her windows. She rose and looked out to see flames consuming the archive towers, the ancient repositories of the realm's legal history burning against the night sky. Her first thought was of the irreplaceable documents being destroyed, centuries of legal precedents, historical records, and scholarly work reduced to ash. But her second thought, informed by weeks of careful study and growing suspicion, was more chilling. This was no accident. Someone was destroying evidence. Helena dressed quickly and made her way toward the main palace quarters, where she found controlled chaos. Servants rushed with water buckets, guards coordinated rescue efforts, and nobles gathered in clusters, their faces reflecting shock and concern that seemed genuine. But one face stood out in its careful composition. Lord Varian, who watched the flames with an expression of regret that didn't quite reach his eyes. King Aaron appeared at Helena's side, his face grim with understanding. "Princess," he said quietly, "I believe our timeline has just accelerated dramatically." Helena nodded, her heart hammering as she grasped the implications. "They're destroying evidence, which means they know we have it. Or they suspect we're close to getting it." The king's expression was thunderous as he watched the archives burn. This level of destruction suggests desperation. They're preparing for their final move. As if summoned by their words, Lord Elcar appeared at the king's other side, his scholar's face stricken with grief at the loss of irreplaceable historical documents. But when he spoke, his words carried urgent purpose. "Your Majesty, Princess Helena," he said in a voice barely above a whisper, "I've just received word through secure channels. Marcus Fairfax escaped the archives with crucial evidence, but he's being pursued. Lady Josiane has requested an immediate emergency meeting." Helena felt everything crystallizing around this moment. The burning archives, the desperate conspiracy, the evidence that could expose everything. It all pointed toward one inevitable conclusion. "Lord Elcar," she said with quiet authority, "please prepare the formal documents for invoking the emergency powers provision. Based on what we learned from our witness testimonies and what Marcus has undoubtedly discovered, I believe we have sufficient evidence to demonstrate immediate mortal danger." The king studied her face intently. "Princess, invoking emergency powers will make you a target like nothing before. Once you claim that authority, they'll have no choice but to move against you immediately and with everything they have." Helena looked out at the burning archives, thinking of all the common people who had been denied justice, all the corruption that had flourished in darkness, all the lives that had been destroyed by the conspiracy's greed for power. She thought of her mother, murdered for trying to protect these same legal rights. She thought of Lady Josiane, forced to live in hiding for the crime of teaching her the truth. "Your Majesty," she said firmly, "they're already moving against me with everything they have. The only difference is that now I intend to fight back with everything I have." As the archive towers continued to burn, casting dancing shadows across the palace walls, Helena felt her childhood finally ending. The frightened, isolated girl who had stood in chains at the palace gates was gone forever, replaced by something the conspirators had never planned for. A royal prosecutor with the courage to use her power and the evidence to make that power decisive. The final battle for the soul of justice in the realm was about to begin, and Helena was ready to lead it. But even as she made this decision, none of them noticed the figure watching from a balcony high above. Lord Varon himself, who had just received word that Marcus Fairfax had escaped with evidence that could destroy everything they had worked to build. If Helena invoked emergency powers, she would gain authority that could override every protection the conspiracy had carefully constructed. Their only chance now was to eliminate her before she could use that authority, and Varenmio had just made the decision to abandon all subtlety and caution in favor of immediate, decisive action. The next few hours would determine whether justice or corruption would rule the realm, and both sides were preparing for a confrontation that would leave no room for half measures or mercy. Dawn was still 2 hours away when Lady Josiane received Marcus Fairfax at the safe house, his clothes singed with smoke and his hands clutching the documents that could change everything. Thomas Inkwell helped the young scholar inside while Lady Josiane quickly examined him for injuries. "I'm unharmed," Marcus assured her, though his voice shook with exhaustion and terror. "But they know who I am now, and they're hunting me through the entire city. Varon has agents everywhere." Lady Josiane led him to the secure upper room where Captain Torres was already waiting with a collection of weapons and emergency supplies. "Tell us everything," she commanded. Every detail could be crucial. As Marcus spread the rescued documents across the table, his account of the night's discoveries painted a picture even more terrifying than they had imagined. The conspiracy wasn't just about controlling the realm's legal system. It was about preparing for systematic genocide of anyone who understood the true extent of royal legal protections. "The Brightwater Protocol," Marcus explained, his finger tracing the coded correspondence, "isn't just about killing Princess Helena. It's about eliminating her entire bloodline, any cousin, uncle, or distant relative who might have claimed to champion the people's court. They're planning to wipe out the Brightwater lineage entirely." Captain Torres studied the documents with professional horror. These foreign connections, they're providing not just political support, but military resources. Look at these supply lists: weapons, explosives, even siege equipment being moved through merchant caravans. Lady Josiane felt ice forming in her veins as she comprehended the full scope of the threat. This isn't just corruption anymore. This is preparation for civil war. "There's more," Marcus continued, pulling out another set of papers. I found correspondence indicating that similar conspiracies are active in at least 3 neighboring kingdoms. This is coordinated across multiple realms. Someone is systematically destroying legal protections for common people throughout the entire region. The implications hit all 3 of them simultaneously. If the conspiracy succeeded here, it would serve as a model for similar takeovers elsewhere, creating a network of corrupt noble houses that could manipulate justice across multiple kingdoms for generations. "We have to warn the king immediately," Torres said, already reaching for his weapons. "We have to do more than warn him," Lady Joseon replied grimly. "We have to arm Princess Helena with legal authority that can cut through every protection these conspirators have built." She moved to her medical kit and withdrew several vials filled with clear liquid. "I've been analyzing the poison samples I obtained from Verina's laboratory. The toxin is sophisticated, designed to mimic natural illness while causing rapid, painful death. But more importantly, I've confirmed that it's the exact same compound that killed Princess Alara." Marcus looked up from the documents. "That provides undeniable proof of the connection between the conspiracy and the princess's mother's death." "More than proof," Lady Joseon said with fierce satisfaction. "It provides legal justification for emergency powers that no court in the realm could challenge. When Helena presents this evidence, along with your archived discoveries and the witness testimonies we've gathered, she'll have grounds to invoke immediate royal authority that supersedes every normal legal process." Captain Torres was already strapping on his sword and preparing to leave. "I'll escort Marcus to the palace through the secure passages. You should remain here until—" "No," Lady Joseon's voice carried absolute determination. "It's time to end this masquerade. Helena needs to see that I'm alive, that I never betrayed her, and that she has allies who are willing to stand with her publicly, regardless of the personal cost." She began gathering her medical equipment and the evidence she had compiled over weeks of careful investigation. Besides, if Helena is going to invoke emergency powers, she'll need a royal physician to formally certify the authenticity of the poison evidence. "I'm the only one with both the medical expertise and the personal knowledge of Princess Alara's death to provide that certification." 20 minutes later, the 3 allies made their way through the pre-dawn darkness toward the palace, using routes that avoided the main thoroughfares where Varen's agents might be waiting. The city around them seemed to sense the approaching crisis. Even the early rising merchants and tradesmen moved with unusual haste, as if some instinct warned them that dramatic change was coming. They reached the palace through the same servant passages Helena had used for her own investigations, emerging in the kitchens where faithful servants loyal to the crown helped them navigate toward the royal quarters without detection. But as they approached the corridor leading to Helena's chambers, Captain Torres held up a hand for silence. Voices echoed from around the corner. Too many voices, and some of them unfamiliar. Torres peered carefully around the stone corner and cursed under his breath. "Varen's personal guards," he whispered. 6 of them, stationed outside Helena's chambers. "They're not palace guards. They're his private agents." Lady Joseon felt her heart sink. "He's moved faster than we anticipated. Helena is already under house arrest." "Not arrest," Marcus whispered, his face pale with understanding. "Protection. He's positioning this as protective custody for a mentally unstable princess who might harm herself or others in her grief-stricken state." The brilliant cynicism of the move was immediately apparent to all 3 of them. Varen was using Helena's own investigative activities as evidence of dangerous paranoia, justifying her isolation until he could arrange for her permanent elimination. But Lady Joseon had spent too many years studying the palace's hidden passages to be deterred by a handful of guards, no matter how well armed. "There's another route," she said quietly. "The Queen's Corridor, it connects to Helena's chambers through the old royal family passages that most people have forgotten exist." They retraced their steps and climbed to a higher level, where Lady Joseon led them through a maze of narrow passages that had once allowed queens and princesses to move through the palace without encountering courtiers or servants. The passages were dusty and clearly unused, but they led directly to a concealed entrance in Helena's private study. When they emerged into the room, they found Helena fully dressed and pacing before her window, her face set with the same determination that had characterized her mother during the most dangerous political negotiations. She turned at the sound of their entrance, and Lady Joseon saw shock, Relief and fierce joy flash across the young woman's features. Lady Joseon, Helena said, her voice thick with emotion. I knew the evidence against you was false. I knew you hadn't betrayed me. Never, my dear child, Lady Joseon replied, moving to embrace the princess she had come to love like a daughter. I have been working every moment since my disappearance to gather the evidence needed to destroy the conspiracy that threatens you. Helena's attention quickly shifted to Marcus and the documents he carried. You succeeded in the archives? Beyond our most optimistic hopes, Marcus replied, spreading the rescued papers across Helena's study table. But the situation is more urgent than any of us realized. They're planning to move against you immediately after the winter solstice, and their plans extend far beyond simple assassination. As Helena examined the evidence, the poison analysis, the archived correspondence, the documented proof of foreign involvement in systematic legal sabotage, her expression transformed from relief to grim understanding. They're not just trying to prevent me from claiming my birthright, she said slowly. They're trying to destroy the very concept of equal justice throughout the region. Precisely, Lady Joseon confirmed, which is why, my dear Helena, you must invoke the emergency powers provision immediately. With this evidence, you have unassailable grounds to claim royal authority that can cut through every protection they've built. Captain Torres moved to the window and peered out at the corridor where Varen's guards maintained their vigil. Princess, they have you under house arrest disguised as protective custody. If you're going to invoke emergency powers, it has to be now, before they can move you to a more secure location. Helena stood silently for a moment, studying the evidence spread before her and weighing the enormous decision that would determine not just her own fate, but the fate of justice throughout the realm. When she looked up, her eyes held the steady resolve that had made her mother one of the most formidable negotiators in the kingdom's history. Lord Elcar prepared the formal documents last night, she said. They're hidden in my mother's law books, ready for my signature and seal. But if I invoke emergency powers, I need witnesses who can testify to the legal validity of my claim. You have them, Lady Joseon assured her. Marcus can testify to the evidence of systematic legal sabotage and foreign involvement. I can provide medical certification of the poison evidence and its connection to your mother's murder. Captain Torres can speak to the immediate military threat to your safety. And I, came a new voice from the concealed passage, can provide the royal authority to make your emergency powers invocation legally binding throughout the realm. All four conspirators turned in amazement as King Aaron himself emerged from the hidden passage, his face set with the same grim determination that had characterized Helena's expression. Your Majesty, Helena said, how did you? I've been monitoring the situation since the archive fire, the king replied. When my agents reported that Varen had placed you under house arrest, I realized that subtlety was no longer an option. He moved to Helena's desk and withdrew the formal emergency powers documents that Lord Elcar had prepared. Princess Helena, as your sovereign and the ultimate authority over royal law in this realm, I hereby witness and authorize your invocation of emergency powers based on documented evidence of immediate mortal danger and systematic conspiracy against the crown. Helena took the documents with hands that remained perfectly steady despite the magnitude of the moment. As she signed her name with the formal authority of her bloodline, she felt the last remnants of her childhood falling away, replaced by the full weight and power of her legal heritage. By my signature and royal seal, she said in a voice that carried absolute authority, I invoke the emergency powers provision granted to royal bloodlines under immediate threat. I claim full investigative authority, the right to compel testimony from any subject of the realm regardless of rank or station, and the power to take immediate action to preserve evidence and protect witnesses. King Aaron added his own signature and seal to the documents. Princess Helena's invocation is hereby recognized and authorized by the crown. She acts with full royal authority until such time as the threats against her person and the integrity of the realm's legal system have been neutralized. As the ink dried on the documents that would change everything, Helena felt power settling around her like a mantle that had been waiting her entire life to claim. She was no longer the frightened girl who had stood in chains at the palace gates, no longer the isolated victim of her father's cruelty, in the conspiracy's manipulation. She was Princess Helena of House Valdres in House Brightwater, heir to Queen Liana's legacy, champion of the people's court, and now the legal authority that would determine the fate of everyone who had perverted justice in service of their own power and greed. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Helena was ready to wield every weapon, legal, political, and moral, that her birthright provided. But even as she made this transformation, alarms began echoing through the palace corridors, and the sound of many armored feet could be heard approaching through the main passages. Varen had realized that his house arrest gambit had failed, and he was escalating to his final, most desperate option. "Princess," Captain Torres said urgently, "we need to move you to a more secure location immediately. Those aren't palace guards approaching. They're armed men in colors I don't recognize." Lady Joseon quickly gathered the poison evidence and crucial documents. "The throne room," she said decisively. "If Helena is going to exercise emergency powers, she needs to do it from the seat of royal authority, where her legal claim cannot be questioned or challenged." King Aaron was already moving toward the passage that would take them to the throne room through routes that avoided the main corridors. Agreed. If Varen wants to challenge Helena's authority, he'll have to do it publicly, in front of witnesses, where his treason will be exposed for all to see. As they made their way through the hidden passages toward the climactic confrontation that would determine the realm's future, Helena carried with her not just the legal documents that granted her unprecedented authority, but the absolute certainty that she was fighting not just for her own life, but for the lives and rights of every citizen who had suffered under the conspiracy's corruption. The emergency powers had been invoked. The evidence had been gathered. The allies had been revealed. Now it was time for justice to be served, regardless of the cost. The throne room had not seen such drama in living memory. Word had spread through the palace with supernatural speed. Princess Helena had invoked emergency powers, Lord Varen was moving armed men through the corridors, and the very foundations of the realm's legal system hung in the balance. Helena sat upon the ancient throne that had belonged to Queen Liana the lawgiver. The emergency powers documents spread before her on a table that had been hastily arranged at the throne's base. Lady Joseon stood to her right as royal physician and chief witness, while Marcus Fairfax stood to her left with the archived evidence that would damn the conspiracy. King Aaron had positioned himself where he could observe but not interfere. This was Helena's moment to wield the authority she had claimed. The great hall filled rapidly with every noble, courtier, and palace official who could gain entry. Word had spread that Princess Helena was exercising powers not invoked in over a century, and the political implications drew observers like iron filings to a magnet. Lord Elcar entered carrying additional legal documents and law books, his scholarly face bright with excitement at witnessing such a historic moment. Captain Torres positioned loyal palace guards at strategic points throughout the hall, while carefully noting which nobles seemed nervous about the proceedings. But all eyes turned to the main entrance as Lord Varen arrived with an entourage that included Lady Morwen, Lord Brennan, Lord Garrett, and a dozen armed men wearing colors that no one in the room recognized. The foreign soldiers, for that's clearly what they were, carried themselves with the professional confidence of mercenaries rather than loyal subjects. Helena rose from the throne as Varen approached, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "Lord Varen, you arrive at an opportune moment. I have just invoked emergency powers based on evidence of immediate mortal danger and systematic conspiracy against the crown. As the first exercise of my authority, I formally charge you with high treason." A collective gasp rippled through the assembled crowd. Varen's face went white, but he quickly composed himself and assumed an expression of wounded dignity. "Your Highness," he said with carefully controlled emotion, "I fear your grief and isolation have affected your judgment severely. These are the ravings of a mentally disturbed young woman who has been reading too many legal texts and developing paranoid delusions." Helena smiled coldly, and those who had known her mother recognized the expression immediately. "Lord Varen, I thank you for providing such a perfect demonstration of the contempt you hold for royal authority. Lord Elcar, please read the formal charges." The scholar stepped forward with a scroll that seemed to unfurl endlessly. "Lord Varen, Master of the Eastern Territories, you stand charged with Systematic forgery of legal documents. Conspiracy to murder Princess Alara of House Brightwater. Conspiracy to murder Princess Helena of House Valdres. Accepting bribes and direction from foreign agents. Systematic corruption of the realm's justice system. And high treason against the crown. The silence in the throne room was absolute. Even Varin's co-conspirators seemed stunned by the comprehensive nature of the charges. "These are absurd accusations without foundation," Varin declared, but Helena noticed that his hand moved instinctively to the red ring he always wore, his nervous habit betraying his inner panic. "Without foundation?" Helena's voice carried a note of genuine amusement. "Marcus Fairfax, please present your evidence to the court." Marcus stepped forward, his young voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Your Highness, assembled nobles, I present documentary evidence retrieved from the palace archives." He held up the first set of documents. "Correspondence between Lord Varin and foreign agents, detailing plans to systematically weaken legal protections throughout the realm." Murmurs of shock and outrage began rippling through the crowd as Marcus continued his presentation, document by document, building an unassailable case for the conspiracy's existence and scope. Communications planning the assassination of Princess Helena, codenamed the Brightwater Protocol. Financial records showing payments received from foreign kingdoms in exchange for legal sabotage. And most damning of all, purchase orders for the rare Eastern nightshade poison that killed Princess Alara. Lady Morwen stepped forward, her face a mask of aristocratic outrage. These documents could be forgeries themselves. What proof do we have of their authenticity? Helena rose from the throne again, her authority filling the space around her like a visible force. "An excellent question, Lady Morwen. Lady Josiane, please present your medical evidence." Lady Josiane moved to the center of the hall, carrying a collection of vials and documents that she arranged on a table where all could see. "Your Highnesses, assembled nobles, I present physical evidence of the conspiracy's methods and scope." She held up a vial of clear liquid that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy in the throne room's light. "This is a sample of Eastern nightshade poison obtained from Lord Varin's private laboratory. Chemical analysis confirms it is identical in every respect to residues found in Princess Alara's personal effects after her death." The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. Gasps of horror, exclamations of outrage, and several nobles making protective gestures as if the very sight of the poison might harm them. "Furthermore," Lady Josiane continued, "I present evidence that this poison has been manufactured in quantity sufficient to eliminate dozens of potential victims. The conspiracy did not plan to stop with Princess Helena. They intended to systematically murder anyone who might challenge their control over the realm's legal system." Lord Brennan, his face flushed with desperate fury, stepped forward with his own challenge. "Even if these materials are authentic, they prove nothing about Lord Varin's involvement. Anyone could have obtained such substances and forged documents to implicate innocent nobles." Helena smiled again, and this time the expression held genuine warmth rather than cold determination. "Lord Brennan, thank you for raising that point. It allows me to present what I believe you will find to be the most compelling evidence of all." She gestured, and from the side entrance to the throne room came a figure that made several of the conspirators step backward in shock. Thomas Crowfield, the merchant whose daughter had been falsely accused by Lady Morwen, entered carrying a leather portfolio and accompanied by two other figures the nobles recognized with growing alarm. "I present witnesses," Helena announced, "citizens of this realm who have suffered directly under the conspiracy's systematic corruption, and who can provide first-hand testimony about the methods used to deny them justice." Thomas Crowfield approached the throne with the confidence of a man who had finally found someone willing to listen to the truth. "Your Highness, I thank you for this opportunity to speak. For 2 years, I have watched my daughter suffer under false accusations designed to force me into poverty and silence." He opened his portfolio and withdrew documents that several nobles recognized with obvious discomfort. "I present evidence that Lady Morwen's accusation against my daughter was fabricated, that the evidence was planted by her servants, and that local magistrates were bribed to ignore testimony that would have proven my daughter's innocence." Lady Morwen's carefully composed expression cracked slightly. "The word of a common merchant against a noble of the realm? This is preposterous. Helena's voice cut through the growing chaos in the throne room with absolute authority. Under the People's Gallery provision established by Queen Lyanna the lawgiver, the testimony of any citizen carries equal weight with noble testimony when presented to the champion of Brightwater blood. Your rank does not place you above the law, Lady Morwen. Sarah Millhaven entered next, carrying documentation about her husband's farm that had been seized through forged debt records. Her testimony was devastating in its detail, providing specific names, dates, and methods used to steal their livelihood through fraudulent legal processes. But the final witness proved to be the most damaging of all. A young woman Helena had never seen before approached the throne with obvious terror, but also with the desperate courage of someone who had finally found hope after years of despair. Your Highness, the woman said, her voice trembling but clear, I am Mira Ashworth, formerly a kitchen servant in this very palace. I present testimony about conversations I overheard between the accused conspirators. The silence in the throne room became absolute as Mira described the midnight meeting in the wine cellar chambers, detailing not just the plans to frame Lady Josiane, but the broader conspiracy to systematically eliminate anyone who threatened their control. I heard Lord Varon himself describe the plan to poison Lady Josiane's reputation, then use her disgrace to isolate and manipulate Princess Helena. Mira continued, her gores growing stronger as she saw the effect of her words on the crowd. And I heard them discuss the murders of Princess Alara and Duke Roderick as necessary eliminations to protect their network. Lord Varon finally lost his composure entirely. These are lies, the testimony of servants and merchants against nobles of ancient lineage. This is not justice. This is revolution. No, Helena said, rising from the throne with the full authority of her bloodline radiating from every word. This is exactly what justice looks like when it is no longer corrupted by those who believe rank places them above law. She gestured to Captain Torres, who had been waiting for this moment with barely contained anticipation. Captain, you will arrest Lord Varon, Lady Morwen, Lord Brennan, and Lord Garrett on charges of high treason. You will also detain for questioning any person who entered this throne room in their company. The foreign mercenaries Varon had brought moved their hands toward their weapons, but found themselves surrounded by palace guards who had been positioned throughout the hall. The brief moment of tension ended when the mercenaries realized they were vastly outnumbered and surrendered their arms without resistance. But Lord Varon was not finished fighting. Even as Captain Torres approached with shackles, he pulled a small vial from his robes, the same clear liquid Lady Josiane had identified as Eastern nightshade poison. If I cannot rule this realm through law, he snarled, then I will at least deny it to those who would destroy everything we have built. He raised the vial toward his lips, but Helena's voice stopped him with a command that seemed to carry the weight of centuries of royal authority. Lord Varon, you will not escape justice through suicide. You will face trial, provide testimony about your foreign contacts, and ensure that every citizen you have wronged receives full restitution for the harm you have caused. Something in her voice, perhaps the absolute certainty that justice would be served, made Varon's hand tremble and lower the poison vial. Captain Torres quickly secured both the poison and the broken man who had tried to corrupt an entire kingdom's legal system. As the conspirators were led away in chains, Helena remained standing before the throne, surrounded by the evidence and witnesses that had made justice possible. The throne room buzzed with excited conversation as nobles, courtiers, and palace staff processed what they had witnessed. The complete exposure and defeat of a conspiracy that had threatened the very foundations of their society. King Aaron approached the throne and bowed formally to Helena. Princess, your exercise of emergency powers has been decisive and appropriate. The realm owes you a debt that cannot be measured. Helena looked around the throne room, seeing not just the faces of those who had witnessed this historic moment, but understanding for the first time the full scope of her responsibilities. She was no longer just a princess who had survived conspiracy and abuse. She was the guardian of justice for every person in the realm who needed protection from those who would corrupt law for personal gain. Your Majesty, she replied, the real work begins now. We must examine every legal decision made under the conspiracy's influence, provide restitution to citizens who have been wronged, and ensure that the legal protections established by Queen Lyanna are restored to their full strength. Lady Joseon stepped forward with tears of pride and relief streaming down her face. My dear Helena, you have become everything your mother hoped you would be, and more than even she could have imagined. Helena embraced the woman who had been her teacher, protector, and second mother through the most dangerous period of her life. Lady Josiana Waysum, none of this would have been possible without your courage and dedication. You risked everything to gather the evidence that made this day possible. As the throne room gradually emptied, leaving only Helena's closest allies and advisors, she sat once more upon Queen Liana's throne and contemplated the magnitude of what had been accomplished and what still lay ahead. The conspiracy had been exposed and defeated, but the damage it had caused would take years to fully repair. Every corrupted legal decision would need to be reviewed, every denied citizen would need to receive justice, and the entire legal system would need to be strengthened against future corruption. But for the first time since her mother's death, Helena felt equal to the challenges that awaited her. She had allies who shared her commitment to justice, evidence that could overturn years of corruption, and most importantly, she had discovered within herself the strength and authority that her bloodline carried. The frightened, isolated girl who had stood in chains at the palace gates was truly gone forever, replaced by Princess Helena of House Valdres and House Brightwater, champion of the people's court and protector of justice for all who needed protection. The realm was safe, the conspiracy was defeated, and the work of true justice could finally begin. 6 months later, Princess Helena stood once again at the great palace gates where her transformation had begun. But this time she wore not chains but the ceremonial robes of the champion of the people's court, and the crowd that had once mocked her now cheered with genuine celebration. The trials of Lord Varian and his conspirators had been swift but thorough. Faced with overwhelming evidence and testimony from dozens of wronged citizens, all had confessed to their crimes in exchange for life imprisonment rather than execution. The foreign agents who had funded their corruption had been expelled from the realm, and diplomatic measures had been taken to prevent similar conspiracies in neighboring kingdoms. More importantly, the legal reforms Helena had implemented were already transforming the lives of common citizens throughout the realm. The People's Gallery had been restored to full operation, with permanent chambers established in every major city where citizens could present testimony directly to appointed champions. The forged legal precedents had been corrected, the corrupted local magistrates had been replaced, and comprehensive restitution had been provided to everyone who had suffered under the conspiracy's systematic injustice. Thomas Crowfield's daughter had been fully cleared of all charges and received a formal apology from the Crown. Sarah Millhaven and her husband had not only regained their farm, but received additional lands as compensation for their suffering. Marcus Fairfax had been appointed as the new chief archivist, with a mandate to ensure that the realm's legal records could never again be corrupted by those who would manipulate justice for personal gain. But today's ceremony represented something even more significant than legal reform. Today, Helena was announcing the establishment of the Queen Liana Academy, a school dedicated to training young women in law, governance, and the protection of citizens' rights. The greatest weapon against corruption, Helena announced to the assembled crowd, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard, is not punishment after the fact, but education that prevents corruption from taking root in the first place. Standing beside her at the podium were the women who would lead this revolutionary institution. Lady Joseon had accepted the position of Dean of Medical and Forensic Studies, bringing her expertise in detecting poison and analyzing evidence to train the next generation of truth seekers. Scholar Evelyn Morgate, who had renounced her involvement with the conspiracy and provided crucial testimony about document forgery techniques, would head the Department of Legal History and Archive Protection. Most remarkably, Mira Ashworth, the kitchen servant whose courage had helped expose the midnight conspirators, had been appointed as the first director of Citizen Services, a new position dedicated to ensuring that people of all backgrounds could access legal protection regardless of their social status. For too long, Helena continued, education in law and governance has been the privilege of those born to nobility. But justice belongs to all people, and therefore the knowledge to protect justice must be available to all people who have the wisdom and courage to seek it. King Aaron stepped forward to add the crown's formal endorsement to the Academy's founding. Princess Helena has proven that true nobility lies not in the circumstances of one's birth, but in the strength of one's character and the depth of one's commitment to protecting others. This academy will ensure that such nobility can be recognized and cultivated wherever it appears. As the formal ceremonies concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Helena walked once more toward the palace gates where her nightmare had begun and her true purpose had been revealed. The iron gates that had once seemed like barriers now felt like doorways, passages between the corruption of the past and the justice of the future. Lady Josiane joined her at the gates, both women contemplating how much had changed since that terrible morning when Helena had stood here in chains, believing herself abandoned and worthless. "My dear," Lady Josiane said softly, "your mother would be so proud of what you have accomplished, not just the defeat of the conspiracy, but the transformation of an entire system of justice." Helena smiled, thinking of Princess Alara's annotated law books and the legacy of protection she had left for her daughter. I think she knew this day would come. All those legal texts she studied, all those notes she left. She was preparing weapons for a battle she knew I would have to fight. "And what about your own battles?" Lady Josiane asked. "You've accomplished everything your bloodline demanded and more. What comes next for Princess Helena?" Helena looked out at the city beyond the palace walls, where citizens now lived with legal protections that had been restored to their full strength, where the people's court operated with transparent justice, and where young women of every background would soon be trained to guard against future corruption. "What comes next," she said with quiet satisfaction, "is the work of making sure this transformation lasts. Every law student we train, every citizen we protect, every corrupt official we prevent from taking power. All of that is part of ensuring that what happened to my mother, to me, and to countless others can never happen again." As the sun set behind the palace walls, casting long shadows across the courtyard, where Helena's public humiliation had been transformed into triumph, she felt the deep contentment that comes from purpose fulfilled and responsibility embraced. She was no longer the fat princess mocked by cruel courtiers, no longer the isolated victim of her father's shame and the conspiracy's manipulation. She had become Princess Helena of House Valdres and House Brightwater, champion of the People's Court, founder of the Queen Liana Academy, and guardian of justice for all who needed protection. The palace gates that had witnessed her lowest moment now stood as monuments to her greatest victory, not just over the enemies who had tried to destroy her, but over the fear, isolation, and despair they had used as weapons against her spirit. The frightened girl was gone forever, replaced by a woman who understood that true power lay not in commanding others, but in protecting them. The realm was safer because she had found the courage to fight for justice, and it would remain safe as long as the principles she had defended continued to guide those who came after her. As night fell over the kingdom, Helena made her way back into the palace, not as a prisoner returning to captivity, but as a protector returning to the seat of authority from which she would ensure that justice, once restored, would never again be corrupted by those who place personal gain above the common good. The story that had begun with chains and humiliation at the palace gates had ended with honor, authority, and the promise that such stories would never need to be repeated. Helena had not only reclaimed her birthright, she had transformed it into something greater than any of her ancestors had imagined possible. And in doing so, she had ensured that the gates of justice would remain open for all who sought its protection, regardless of their birth, their wealth, or their status. The shocking plans the Alpha King had held for the princess sold to him in chains had culminated not in marriage or traditional protection, but in something far more revolutionary, the creation of a true champion who would guard the rights of all people for generations to come. The palace gates closed behind her, but the justice they now represented would remain open forever.